We see a lot of discussion on the topic of purpose when it comes to companies, centering more on corporates and large institutions. What does it mean to be a company operating within society? How do you factor in purpose when, for many people, the very notion of a company existing is to simply make shareholders happy, generate profit? Now, as we've seen, some of the most influential entities in the world today are companies that just a few years ago were mere startups that have achieved a seismic pace of growth and today are defining markets, defining economies, sometimes defining policy. So how do these large startups and those that are in the reckoning and set to grow, how do we factor in purpose? What does it mean to be a startup today, intending to scale, which means you have to grow, intending to grow in your profit, but also factoring your purpose and how you're impacting society? To take us through this discussion, I'd like to welcome our moderator to the stage. Beena Khan is an entrepreneur, strategic advisor, and an angel investor. She is the co-founder of Summit, a boutique accounting and tax advisory firm that works primarily with tech startups and high net worth individuals. She also manages an investment fund that focuses on disruptive technology startups, many of whom are on the panel today. Our panelists are Stefano Gurciolo, partner at Redstone VC, Lola Fernandez Flores, senior investment associate at VentureSouk, Yana Yasovich, head of platform at Alter Global, and we have Wael Ayeni, managing partner for Helios Ventures Associates. Without much further ado, I'd like to welcome Beena and our panelists to the stage. A round of applause, please. Ladies and gentlemen, our first panel at North Star 10X this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel today. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to have our experts here talk to us about how people, purpose, and profit are far from mutually exclusive. Now, traditionally, for-profit corporations have aligned themselves with the notion that creating profit and social impact, or otherwise purpose, are two separate goals and not interlinked. But the pandemic has shown us otherwise. It has changed the way we work, live, and interact with one another, and shown us that indeed these are not mutually exclusive. I'd like to turn to our industry experts today and ask each of you, what role do you believe startups play in this global movement towards a purpose-led or social impact business? Any one of you.
Hi everybody, really nice to be here and nice to meet you all. Maybe to address the question, I want to I think there are two ways, at least, in which startups can address this issue. One, which has been, we've shown already with COVID and other things that have been happening, is to find the nexus of those solutions, especially in technology, between that can be profitable, they can be sustainable from a financial perspective, and they can solve massive problems. Just to give you an example, think about batteries. 97% of batteries out there that are used for chips are either just trashed or burnt. And that's lithium, that's very rare earth material. There is a company out there that I just met that is actually addressing this problem by having biodegradable batteries. So by finding and commercializing solutions that are addressing key issues in sustainability is definitely one thing. The other is culture. Most companies scale, and once they, well, not actually most, but the best ones scale, and once they scale, the culture gets replicated, right? And not always the best culture actually spread it out there, right? So one thing that I, as an investor, encourage oftentimes is to make sure that the companies that I invest in have culture when it comes to diversity, when it comes to feedback, when it comes to transparency, that are fitting with these ideas that we're talking about today, so that the ones that actually scale will be able to spread these new processes around. A good example are GitHub for remote working very well, very healthy environment, and a few more. I'll leave the floor to the other panelists now.
Hi everyone, excited to be here. I think startups and founders play a vital role in this pursuit, and by doing what they best do, which is building different products and different services that rethink the way how we interact with education, with financial services, with climate technologies. And mission-led, we must make this distinction between mission-led businesses and ESG businesses. I think all startups are equipped to become ESG positive. It's how you run your business, incorporating diversity. But then you can also go a notch further and just build a purposeful company by building a technology-enabled product that aligns and scales impact at the same pace as you scale revenue and traction.
Hi everyone, great to be here today. Thank you for having me. I would approach the question by actually starting a little bit earlier in the value chain by thinking, I think it's important to ask the question before actually diving into building any product of, why are we building this? Is this actually necessary?
The why.
Is the market there? And that's a unique way to frame it, because I think that in the world of entrepreneurship, we can always think of new models to build, but it's important to take that step actually beforehand and understand, is it necessary to be building what we are? Is it something truly new and different and solving a problem for the consumer? And that to me is a way to start with purpose and to have a lot of clarity around why we're building something. And then I think once a company begins, both founders and investors have tremendous opportunity to play a real role in making sure that it's a company that remains purpose-led overall. And that starts from asking the question of, how am I going to build and who am I going to involve in the process? And from an investor perspective, we have a choice of who we're going to support and why. And so I think that all of these components play a role.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I think I agree with what most of the panelists have said. The only thing I'll add is we invest in a lot of frontier markets, and wherever you go around the world, whether that's Africa, Middle East, Latin America, Southeast Asia, you cannot but notice that technology is going to be the future. So the consumption of digital data and digital services is growing exponentially. And in a world where we still have challenges, right? We have kind of 8 billion people, there's challenges around climate, education, healthcare services, financial services. It's easy to see that most entrepreneurs that are in the digital space are going to change what the future looks like. Then the question becomes, what do you want to build, as you said, and how do you build it, and from who do you build that for? The good thing I see, at least from an investor perspective, is that it's never been easier to start a company and to scale a company. And it's never been easier to find investors that are aligned with what you're building. There's a choice of investors you can partner with. So I do think I'm very optimistic about entrepreneurs and founders shaping the future. And that future inherently is going to be purpose-led, because people spend time on what they care about. So I do think there's a huge alignment between capital and mission these days.
So it's clear, thank you, panel members. So it's clear that organizations need to respond to global issues, not just responsibly, but aesthetically, authentically, meaningfully. And technology business in particular, realizing that consumers, particularly millennials, are attracted to organizations that have a social impact cost to them. The new consumer now evaluates a company based on its environmental, social, and corporate governance factors. So what do our panel members here think how a startup can embed ESG into its DNA?
I'm happy to start. I think the first thing that is important to address is that ESG has gotten a little bit of a reputation over the last handful of years for being more of a buzzword, both internal to a company and as far as investors go, than an actual goal. But I think that misses the point, because I actually think that there's a really strong, important element to these pillars of environmental, social, and corporate governance, pillars that should be maintained and preserved, and it's actually about digging a little bit more deeper than that. So If I start back to what I mentioned before around why we're building, and let's assume now that the factors are right and we're building for a really clear purpose, then I think ESG comes into play when you think about how you're going to manufacture your product. It comes into play when you think about who you're going to hire on your team and the kind of internal culture that you're going to build. It comes into play with the products, the tools, the services that you're going to use for manufacturing, for long-term production. And in my mind, I think all of these components are ones that remain very vibrant, alive, and necessary for us to preserve and scale as we think about ESG long-term.
Let's be honest for a second. When you're a founder at a C stage, a Series A stage, you're really worried about surviving, right? And the way ESG has been framed, especially in the past 10 years, has been more geared towards other kinds of asset classes, public equity, private equity, but the big cap, right? So it's really hard to translate those practices into a company of 10, 50 people that is about to scale to 50 and 100, right? So I think, and I agree with you, the way ESG is being framed right now for startups is a bit wrong. We need to rethink it, and this is the discussion that we should be having. Said that, what we do, for example, is two things. When I lay down a term sheet, I added a small clause which is called ESG commitments, which essentially agreeing, me as an investor and them as founders, over the next 100 days to come up with KPIs that are relevant for your business, not for a public equity company, that will track some values that we both think are important. So that's one very practical thing that I think we could do. We encourage our founders to think about it, and we work with them. The second thing is when a company scales. When you get to 50, when you get to 100, and I go back to culture again, I always say culture because it's so damn important. You need guidance. A founder, let's be honest again, does not have the know-how and the people in a public company to know how to treat a diverse, or how to have a diverse or a just sort of team, right? And that's why we are partnering a lot with service provider, people that know way more than me, way more than us investors, into supporting our founders through a platform approach of making that happen.
Thank you. I think founders are somewhat incorporating good ESG practices unconsciously these days, just because they're younger, they care about sustainability, they care about diversity. I echo both of my panelists' messages, but I also want to take a step back and say, who is funding and who is asking for these ESG practices? I think it's important for investors to look at themselves in the mirror and say, are we walking the talk? Do we have our ESG ducks in a row? And so if you're asking for a diverse team investing from a homogenous team, then that's something that, for me as an investor, you need to take that first step to do the exercise yourself before asking any founder to comply with X reporting or ESG regulation.
Yeah, I think it's been well said. The only few things I'll add is that I think, and I don't want to date myself, and this might be a controversial kind of topic. We should be very careful about slogans because, slogans come every 5 years. The first time is, World Bank End Poverty. People are still poor today. SDG goals, that's another thing. People did that. Now everybody is ESG. I've never met founders that are anti-ESG because once you start a company, you actually want to have impact. You actually want to do the right thing. And then with the slogan is that when we talk about ESG, I think somebody rightly said it, starting a company is very, very hard. So every day you wake up, you're trying to do the right thing. Is that we, or people that are in the policy sector, or actually investors as well, we need to come up with frameworks that provide tools for people that want to do the right thing to engage with. Because I don't think there's nobody that is anti-ESG. It's just that we need to move from the slogans to actual tools that actually implement this, because otherwise it could end up being another slogan that gets replaced with the next slogan 5 years from now, right? So just, we got to make sure that it's actionable and founders can actually engage with tools to make it real.
Excellent, thank you. Now, Stefano here made a very good point, and he actually put it into tangible, workable actions. You know, how as an investor, he actually puts it on the term sheet and makes it part of his KPIs for the startup to deliver on these ESG drivers. And so we can see here that investors are part of the driving change. Now, what do you guys think? Is it the startup or the investor that has a more significant impact, or the driving force towards implementing these factors such as ESG or a social impact? Or how can they work hand in hand, where it's not, well, you know, the startups have to deliver to the investor, but they're all aligned on the same goals?
Yeah, maybe I'll chime in on that one. I actually think it's both, right? Because you know, as an investor, you don't run the company, so you can have whatever requirements you have, but if the founder is not aligned, it's not going to happen. And for the founder perspective, like I said, I don't think there's any opposition to it. They just need clarity and sometimes direction. The good thing with investors is that when you sit on boards of this company, one of your roles is to look at things from 10,000 feet level. Because when you're a founder, you're in the trenches and you have narrow vision and tunnel vision, you're going directly. As a board member, as an investor, you're seeing a lot of things more globally. So that's where you can be quite effective, in my view, at the board level to say, have you thought about this? What do we want to achieve from an ESG perspective? And what are the KPIs that we want to drive to? Because we can't drive to every KPI. We have to drive to KPIs that help the company scale. It's aligned with where they're trying to go to, but also fulfill some of the ESG requirements out there or the ESG impact goals that they have. So I do think it's a conversation, and it's kind of alignment between the founders and the investors, not either or, in my view.
One more question alongside that, Yana, maybe you can answer that. Do you feel that the board plays a part in this as well, and perhaps acts as a middle party between the investors and the startup founders to push the ESG cause?
The board? I think it can. It doesn't have to, but it can. I also think that VC in general is such a soft skills relationship business that I think that very much plays a role in this conversation, because in addition to the things that we ask, for example, as investors of our founders from a term sheet perspective or from a quarterly update perspective, what we share back to our LPs, there's also just the day-to-day conversations that we're likely having over WhatsApp or over email. And I think those represent excellent opportunities for us to check in with our founders on how's your internal culture these days? How's the team doing? How is it going with your senior leadership? Who does that look like right now? And I think physically spending time with those teams as well, it paints a great picture. So in my mind, I agree with both of you that I think everybody has the potential to play a role here. And what I really just want to highlight is that in addition to the big moments, I think we need to utilize the day-to-day opportunities to connect with our founders more also as a chance to understand where these things stand and help drive them forward in a way that we think is meaningful.
Excellent.
I think in the end, it comes down to being a good partner, to finding a good partner for the next 7 to 10 to 15 years. You're choosing your board, your investors, your executive team based on the strength that they display commercially, financially, strategic, and embedded on every layer is their values. And so if you want to be transparent, you should look for partners that are transparent, for investors that are going to give you transparency on the day-to-day and on the board. So in that sense, I believe that when founders and investors think about ESG, it's also playing a role which types of values they want to build this company with.
Just wanted to add one more thought on, where do we stand in the investor with the startup I cannot think of these two actors without thinking about policy and without LPs, right? It's all interconnected, as you all know, right? So again, if I think about, I invest mainly in Europe, so I know very well that word. And what happened in the last few years is that the European Union really has been aggressive in pushing funds, private equity and venture capital funds, into categorizing themselves into categories of ESG commitment. They're called Article 6 to 9, whatever that means. So this came from above. This is not something that the managers wanted. But if you are able to comply with the highest number of articles, it's easier for you to raise from certain kinds of institutional LPs, right? And let's be honest again, most fund managers would have not done it without regulation. Because, people respond to the market. These are the rules. I play by the rules. If the rules change, then I do something. So I want you to recognize also the role of governments in really shaping this. Obviously, they listen to stakeholders, which can be as investors, founders, citizenships. But that's probably the most important thing to me.
Amazing, thank you. At this point, we would like to open up the panel and the audience to a Q&A.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Currently, I'm a crypto consultant for multiple startups in El Salvador. So, as a company, now that you guys are mentioning ESG, El Salvador is the perfect place to put your money or to put your business to build something that is actually meaningful and an example for the rest of the world. Starting with banking companies, banking people within an entire country that has never been banked, putting money into the agro technologies, and a lot of the things that I have seen today over here are very applicable to what El Salvador needs as a country. So for you guys as VCs, what is your optics or what is your impression about what El Salvador government is doing when it comes to the adoption of Bitcoin, the interest of the government to educate people, like creating an army of Lightning developers, crypto developers in general, like for any company that I am maybe consulting or that I have talked, a professional that I have talked to, and come to you as VCs, how can I approach you and tell and say, hey, I have this company that needs money and is the perfect ESG example of for something that you guys can do? How can I approach you? That would be my main question.
I'm happy to answer because I might be mistaken, but I think that I'm the only investor on the stage that invests in LATAM. Our fund has quite a number of investments so far in Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina. Not El Salvador yet, but maybe in the future. I think, first of all, what has been really inspiring to me over the last handful of years is Dubai is a fantastic example of this, I think, but it's spread larger now, where we see a lot of governments acting as incredible catalysts of entrepreneurial change in their countries and really creating the ecosystem that entrepreneurs can thrive in. And I think that's really exciting in general to see and is hugely transformative, because it's very hard to be an entrepreneur, period, but it's especially hard to do so in an environment where the regulatory ecosystem isn't set up for you. And so I think it's really amazing to see examples like the one that we are sitting in here today of driving that forward. To your second question around, how to approach investors and pitch something forward, I think all of us, frankly, are just as dependent on fantastic founders as you are on investors. It's very much a two-way, non-hierarchical relationship in that capacity. Our entire business is predicated on having strong deal flow and opportunities that we want to drive forward. And so I can't speak for everyone, but I think that my opinion would be shared of get in touch with investors through the public channels, through reaching out to them individually, through anyone that is a scout for them. Everyone is always keen to learn about new ideas around the world, and I'm certainly an example of that. So happy to speak more after if you'd like.
The one thing I just wanted to add, I don't, because I heard you say a comment over there, and I think most people on the panel will agree with this. I don't want us to leave the wrong impression, is that when you approach investors, you should lead with what you actually do. If your first page is, I'm an ESG company, I don't think,
Agreed.
I don't think that's what we're advising. I think the thing is that you say, this is what I'm doing, this is what I want to solve, and then I care about ESG, and this is how ESG applies, but you need to lead, first of all, with what exactly are you solving, right? So I just want to make sure there's some clarity there.
Agreed.
I think if you guys all agree, your why should answer the ESG questions. Over there.
Thank you so much. I'm a student at New York University Abu Dhabi and a Violet Ventures member, and I have a question. Do you believe that government and private actions on sustainability and the ESG should be complementary, or it should be either one or another? For example, is it permissible for a startup in a country which cares a lot about sustainability to say that I'm already paying taxes that go on such targets, it is okay for me to not take my own actions? Or should startups in such eco-friendly countries and eco-aware countries care more about utilizing the opportunities that sustainability awareness has, that they have in sustainability awareness in such countries?
It's a great question. So you probably, or some of you have heard of the work of Mariana Mazzucato. She's a political economist at UCL London, right? She wrote a fantastic book called The Entrepreneurial State, where she showed off how governments can actually partner with private investors, private individuals, in order to make innovation happen. I really espouse that vision, because when we talk about ESG, the underlying goods that we are talking about tend to be mostly public. Climate change is a public good externality. And by definition, that cannot be tackled solely by private individuals, because we don't have enough resources. So definitely, I always encourage, as much as I can, a dialogue between governments and privates. Does that mean higher taxes? Does that mean policy X or Y? That depends on the actual context, of course, right? On where we are and so on and so forth. So I cannot give an exact recipe, but that must happen. That dialogue must happen.
Yeah, I think that conversation is just key, right? One cannot coexist without the other. And sometimes government will lay out the vision and private sector will follow suit, and sometimes it'll happen that the government will see that something is happening in the market and adapt to it, and that has happened in sustainability, that has happened in fintech, now it's happening with blockchain. So it's the natural course, and what I think it's important is to keep that conversation alive.
Excellent, thank you. Now I know we're out of time, but we'll be hanging around for a little bit after our panel, so feel free to come to any of us for any questions or any comments or thoughts you want to share. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.